Hey everyone, and welcome back to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight we're going to dim the lights, perhaps settle into your favorite blanket, and embark on a rather profound journey into the very heart of ancient Egypt. Our focus tonight isn't on the sprawling deserts or the monumental pyramids, not directly anyway, but on the gilded cages that were the lives of the pharaohs themselves. These were figures of immense power. Yes, but their existence was often a strange, unsettling blend of divine obligation, chilling rituals, and surprisingly human frailty. Now, as the ancient world slowly unfurls before us, let us begin our quiet descent into the world of those who claimed to be living gods, starting with the very essence of their exalted yet profoundly disturbing status. Imagine, if you will, the early morning light filtering through the papyrus screens of a great palace, perhaps in Memphis or Thebes. Even before the sun, Ra himself has fully begun his daily journey across the sky. A profound weight settles upon the land. This weight, invisible yet omnipresent, emanates from a single figure, the pharaoh. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was not merely a king, not simply a ruler who inherited a throne. No, the pharaoh was a living god, a concept so deeply woven into the fabric of their reality that it shaped every breath, every grain of sand, every ripple of the Nile. You see, the pharaoh was understood to be the living embodiment of Horus, the sky god, son of Osiris and Isis. This wasn't a metaphor or a poetic title. It was a fundamental truth. From the moment the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt was placed upon their head during the coronation, the individual ceased to be fully human. They transcended the mundane, becoming a conduit for divine power, a bridge between the celestial and the terrestrial. Their word was not just law, it was the will of the gods made manifest. Their decrees were not merely commands, but echoes of cosmic order. Their very being was sacrosanct, untouchable, radiating an aura that demanded prostration and averted gazes from even the most powerful courtiers. To look directly upon the pharaoh was to risk being overwhelmed by the divine radiance, or perhaps to glimpse too much of the human beneath the god. This absolute authority permeated every facet of Egyptian life. The pharaoh was the supreme leader in all matters of state, religion, and war. It was their sacred duty to maintain Ma'at, the cosmic order, the very principle of truth, balance, and justice that held the universe together. If the pharaoh faltered, if their piety wavered, it was believed that the very cycles of life, the sun's rising, the Nile's vital floods, the agricultural bounty would cease. Chaos, famine, invasion, and divine retribution were not abstract threats, but direct consequences of a pharaoh's misstep. To rebel against the pharaoh was not just treason, it was sacrilege, a defiance of the divine order itself. This made the pharaoh the absolute linchpin of their civilization, a terrifyingly vital role for any mortal to shoulder. Yet despite this awe-inspiring, utterly remote divine status, or perhaps because of it, the lives of these pharaohs were steeped in a profound and often unsettling darkness. Behind the glittering facade of immense riches and unquestionable royalty lay a life of extremes, a gilded cage. You might picture a golden birdcage exquisitely crafted, shimmering in the desert sun, but a cage nonetheless. Every moment from dawn until the deepest night was governed by an intricate and often brutal web of rituals, superstitions, and suffocating obligations. There was no casual spontaneity for the pharaoh. Every gesture, every utterance, every meal, even their sleep was imbued with cosmic significance and bound by customs passed down through millennia. Even the crowns they wore, crafted from solid gold and electrum, could weigh up to 5 pounds. a literal physical burden that mirrored the immense weighty responsibilities they carried on their divine shoulders. It was a life of unparalleled luxury, yes, but one lived under a constant crushing pressure, a profound isolation at the very peak of human existence. A fascinating, if somewhat disturbing paradox to consider as we drift further into their ancient world. As the first faint blush of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, not over the humble mud-brick homes of the common folk, but over the sprawling, sun-drenched palace complex in Thebes, the pharaoh's day would begin. This was no ordinary waking, no gentle stirring to the mundane sounds of a busy household. Oh no. You wouldn't find a chirping alarm clock or the gentle aroma of brewing coffee here. Instead, you might imagine the hushed melodic strains of harps and lutes played by blind musicians positioned specifically to serenade the sunrise. Their soft, ethereal music would drift through the royal chambers, gently coaxing the divine sleeper from the mystical communion with the sun god Ra that constituted their nightly repose. Even before the pharaoh's eyes had fully opened, barefoot servants moving with a silent reverence would glide into the chamber, bearing trays laden with an array of delicacies. This wasn't a breakfast, mind you, but rather a royal fast. A light symbolic repast before the day's arduous ritualistic duties began. Perhaps cool, sweet date wine, freshly baked bread, or succulent figs would be offered. The very air of the palace, even in these early hours, would be thick with the scent of blossoming lotuses from the colonnaded courtyards where songbirds chirped from lush foliage. Fountains murmured softly, and occasionally a tamed baboon, or even a docile lion cub, might be seen observing the morning rituals with a contemplative gaze. It was a serene picture, one of controlled, exquisite luxury, a world away from the gritty dawn experienced by those toiling outside the palace walls. Then came the elaborate grooming regimen, a process less about personal vanity and more about ritual purification and the assertion of divine identity. You would not, for instance, see the pharaoh with a full head of hair. Oh, heavens, no. To stave off the ever-present threat of lice and to maintain ritual purity, the pharaoh's head and entire body were shaved meticulously smooth. A rather practical, if somewhat stark choice, wouldn't you agree? Next, skilled attendants would carefully line their eyes with striking kohl, a black powder made from galena, and a vibrant green malachite. This wasn't merely for beauty, though it certainly enhanced their regal gaze. It was also believed to deflect the blinding glare of the desert sun, serving as an ancient form of sunglasses, and rather practically to ward off eye infections. Their limbs would then be anointed with fragrant oils and perfumes, myrrh, frankincense, cinnamon, not just for pleasant scent, but for magical protection from evil spirits and misfortune, a subtle shield in a world teeming with unseen forces. As these sacred unctions were applied, one could almost hear the faint clink of gold and electrum as exquisite pectorals and wristbands were fastened gleaming against their smooth skin. Finally, the ultimate symbols of their divine kinship would be put in place, the iconic double crown, the shent, which brilliantly symbolized the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under their singular divine rule. And of course the shepherd's crook and the flail, ancient symbols of their role as protector and provider of their people and their ability to punish those who strayed. Each item, each gesture was steeped in millennia of tradition, a silent ballet choreographed by the very principles of Ma'at. Every movement was precise, every adornment carefully chosen for any deviation. Any misstep was believed to court chaos, to threaten the delicate balance of the cosmos. There was no room for error, no space for individuality, only the relentless, beautiful, and utterly suffocating precision of being a living God. This ritualistic washing, often in a sacred pool or with specially consecrated holy water by attending priests, was the final act of purification, preparing the Pharaoh not just for the day, but for their divine duties. They were transformed piece by meticulous piece from a mere mortal into the embodiment of Horus, ready to face the cosmic obligations of a divine ruler. You can almost feel the weight of expectation, the profound pressure, even in these early quiet moments of the day. With the meticulous morning rituals complete, the Pharaoh, now adorned and purified, turned immediately to the most crucial aspect of their day, their religious duties. This was not a mere formality, a perfunctory nod to the divine. For the Pharaoh, who was the very high priest of every temple in Egypt, it was the bedrock of their existence, the primary reason for their divine kingship. Their first stop before any earthly matters of state would be the palace shrine. Here the air would be thick with the sweet, heady scent of burning incense rising in fragrant plumes from ornate censers held by chanting priests. You might imagine yourself standing in the hushed presence of this sacred space. Perhaps a colossal statue of Ra, the sun god, or Osiris, lord of the underworld, stands before you, gleaming faintly in the low light. The Pharaoh would approach not as a supplicant in the common sense, but as a peer, albeit a junior one to the great gods. With solemn movements they would prostrate themselves before the divine images, a profound act of humility that paradoxically reinforced their own divine status. It was a careful balance, a performative dance of reverence. Offerings would then be delivered, libations of cool water, rich milk, and precious wines poured into golden bowls alongside statuettes of the Pharaoh himself, miniature versions of the living God symbolically offering their very essence to the greater deities. These offerings were not simply gifts. They were part of a sacred transaction, an ancient covenant, where the Pharaoh's piety and generosity ensured the god's blessings upon the land and its people. This was a daily, often tedious, but absolutely vital responsibility. Every sacred spell recited, every grain of incense burned before the cult statues. Every offering delivered had to be performed with perfect, unblemished precision. There was no room for error, no improvisation. The ancient texts, particularly the pyramid texts, the oldest known religious writings in the world, served as a kind of spiritual script for the Pharaoh's journey, not just through the day, but through the treacherous trials of the afterlife to the blissful field of reeds. Imagine the pressure, the sheer anxiety that must have accompanied these rituals. The stakes were quite literally cosmic. The people believed with unwavering conviction that the Pharaoh's direct communion with the gods was what sustained the very cycles of life, the relentless journey of the sun across the sky, the essential life-giving annual floods of the Nile, and the subsequent bounty of the agricultural harvests. If the Pharaoh somehow failed in these duties, if a ritual was flawed, the cosmic order, Ma'at, would unravel, plunging Egypt into chaos. No pressure then. This sacred exchange was not just a symbolic act. It was seen as the very bedrock of the cosmos. The Pharaoh, through these daily meticulous performances, was continually renewing the divine life force, ensuring the well-being of the two lands. Think of it, your entire nation's prosperity, its very existence, resting on your ability to perfectly recite ancient incantations and placate unseen deities. It certainly makes the pressures of a modern-day CEO's quarterly report seem rather quaint by comparison, doesn't it? The air thick with the scent of myrrh and the quiet hum of unseen divine energy would slowly give way to the more terrestrial concerns of governance, but the underlying anxiety of maintaining divine favor would surely linger a constant undertone to the rest of the pharaoh's intricately choreographed day. With the divine duties meticulously discharged, the pharaoh would then transition to the more earthly, yet no less significant matters of governance and state. The shift would be subtle, a quiet procession from the sacred shrine to the grand audience chamber where the weighty affairs of Egypt awaited. You might picture the pharaoh now seated upon a magnificent golden throne, perhaps flanked by imposing statues of Horus and Wadjet, their divine protectors. The walls of this chamber would likely be adorned with vibrant frescoes depicting scenes of royal triumph, the pharaoh smiting his enemies, or presenting lavish offerings to the gods, a constant visual reinforcement of their power and authority. At their feet, often seated on a low stool, would be the great royal wife, a formidable figure in her own right, quietly observing. Standing before the throne, bowing deeply, would be the vizier, the eyes and ears of the pharaoh, the highest official in the land, along with other key courtiers and scribes. This was the moment for the day's business to unfold. The vizier would, with precise and reverent tones, read out reports and petitions, a litany of the myriad issues facing the vast kingdom. Boundary disputes between landowners, intricate trade agreements with distant lands like Nubia, the Hittite Empire, or Mesopotamia, and the progress of colossal construction projects, from new temples to granaries, would all be brought before the living God. The pharaoh would listen, often in silence, their expression unreadable beneath the heavy double crown. And then, with a single measured word, or perhaps a slight nod, they would deliver their final judgment. There was no appeal, no higher court. The pharaoh's word was absolute. This absolute authority, while seemingly efficient, also harbored a rather significant peril. With no real checks on a pharaoh's whims, it was remarkably easy for even the most well-intentioned ruler to succumb to corruption, to indulge in tyranny, or to be swayed by the machinations of ambitious courtiers. History, after all, is replete with examples. Think of the brutal taxes levied upon the common people, or the forced labor demanded for the lavish monuments that dotted the landscape, all at the pharaoh's command. Or consider the more insidious side, the paranoid purges, like those famously attributed to Ptolemy IV, who allegedly orchestrated the murders of his own mother and brother to secure his position. It wasn't a job for the faint of heart, or for those who valued consensus. Throughout the day, messengers and petitioners would arrive bearing urgent reports from distant military skirmishes, or perhaps desperate pleas for aid due to drought or famine. Foreign diplomats laden with tribute would present themselves seeking favorable trade concessions or alliances. The pharaoh would render judgments their authority unquestionable, their decisions shaping the very trajectory of millions of lives. It was a dizzying array of responsibilities, a constant balancing act of divine decree and practical governance, all performed under the unblinking eye of a deferential court. The weight of the patient on the pharaoh's head was a mere trifle compared to the crushing burden of ensuring cosmic order and maintaining control over a sprawling empire, a task they undertook with an unsettling blend of divine detachment and human calculation. Once the weighty matters of state had been dispensed with, the pharaoh's day would transform into a blur of meticulously choreographed ceremonies and public spectacles. These weren't mere entertainments, mind you, but carefully staged performances designed to awe the populace, and perhaps more importantly, to ceaselessly reinforce the pharaoh's divine right to rule. You might imagine the thrum of distant drums growing louder as the royal procession approached. The pharaoh, seated regally in a gilded chariot, would process through the city, the sheer grandeur of the occasion intended to impress upon every observer their living god status. Crowds would line the dusty streets, cheers echoing off the mud brick homes, as the Pharaoh, in a gesture of divine benevolence, would occasionally shower the adoring populace with gifts, perhaps a handful of gold trinkets or a scattering of grain, a tangible sign of their prosperity emanating directly from the divine source. This public display wasn't limited to parades. The Pharaoh might officiate over the opening of a new temple, a monumental undertaking that had consumed years of labor and resources. Imagine the solemnity as the Pharaoh, perhaps clad in shimmering white linen, grasped a golden mallet to drive the very first peg into the earth, symbolically consecrating the sacred ground. Every step, every gesture, even in these public moments, was imbued with an undercurrent of deep-seated superstition. You would never, for instance, see the Pharaoh entering a room with their left foot first. Only the right was deemed auspicious. And when dining, though, they would partake of sumptuous meals laden with choicest meats, fresh produce, honey figs, and dates, a feast for the senses and a stark contrast to the daily gruel of most Egyptians. They would only eat with their left hand. The right hand, after all, was reserved for communing with the gods. It was also considered deeply unlucky for their shadow to fall upon a priest or a sacred statue, a minor detail that must have added an intriguing layer of spatial awareness to their otherwise majestic movements. Beyond the relentless cycle of public duty, there were, of course, moments dedicated to leisure, though even these often carried symbolic weight. Hunting expeditions into the vast, unforgiving desert were a favorite royal pastime. Picture the Pharaoh perhaps mounted in a war chariot, pursuing lions or gazelles, the dust rising in great clouds behind them. This wasn't just sport. It was a potent metaphor for the Pharaoh's triumph over chaos, a demonstration of their vitality and prowess, their ability to subdue the wild and maintain order. Back within the palace, quieter pursuits beckoned. The elite, including the Pharaoh, enjoyed board games like Senet. This wasn't merely a game of chance. It was believed to mimic the soul's perilous journey through the the underworld, with the final squares representing the gates to the afterlife. A rather high-stakes board game, wouldn't you agree? For relaxation after the rigors of governing and public appearances, the Pharaoh might retire to the palace pools for a refreshing swim, or perhaps embark on a leisurely barge ride down the Nile, the very artery of their civilization. On grand occasions like the Opet festival, the Pharaoh would accompany the statues of the Theban triad, Amun-Mut and Khonsu, in a ceremonial river procession, their barge drifting slowly down the sacred waters with teeming crowds thronging the river banks, a spectacle of profound religious and national unity. These moments, while outwardly leisurely, were still an extension of their public persona, a constant reaffirmation of their unique and vital role. Even the most mundane acts, like swatting away the persistent flies that were a common nuisance in such a warm climate, would be handled by attentive servants who also stood ready with water or date wine to quench the Pharaoh's thirst. The day, from its sacred dawn to its twilight leisure, was an unbroken chain of obligation and display, an existence of unparalleled privilege, certainly, but one that allowed precious little room for genuine, unburdened human experience. As the vibrant hues of the Egyptian sunset softened into twilight, casting long purple shadows across the palace courtyards, the Pharaoh would finally retire to their private quarters. This was a moment for relative relaxation, a quiet interlude before the evening banquet, which, like all aspects of royal life, was a blend of indulgence and subtle duty. Imagine the quiet murmur of conversation, the soft strumming of harps and lyres, and the graceful movements of dancing girls, their forms barely visible in the flickering lamplight. The Pharaoh might sip a cup of chilled date wine, a rich, sweet indulgence, while contemplating matters of theology or state, with their closest advisors. It was a time for reflection, for the exchange of ideas, and perhaps for a rare moment of introspection. Yet even in the hushed sanctity of their private chambers, the specter of death and eternity was never far from the Pharaoh's mind. Indeed, it was woven into the very fabric of their existence, a constant undertone to every moment of their waking life, and remarkably, even their sleep. For the Pharaoh's sleep was not seen as mere repose. It was believed that during the dark hours the Pharaoh's soul, or Ba, mystically merged with the sun, god Ra, accompanying him on his perilous nightly journey through the underworld, regenerating the divine life force that would allow the sun to rise again. This was a time of profound significance, a period of strange visions and communion with the gods, far removed from the mundane dreams of ordinary mortals. Ancient Egypt has even left us with enigmatic dream books, such as the Chester Beatty Papyrus, which offer a fascinating glimpse into the interpretation of these royal nocturnal experiences. One particularly vivid account details how Ramses II, the great builder, dreamt that the god Ptah angrily chastised and even struck him for leaving a temple uncompleted. Imagine waking from such a dream, not with a vague sense of unease, but with the immediate and terrifying conviction that a god was personally displeased with your performance. The papyrus records that Ramses immediately expedited the temple work, a testament to the profound impact these dreams had on their waking lives. There was, it seems, no true refuge from the crushing pressure of divinity, not even in the quiet sanctuary of sleep. To further safeguard this mystical journey, and to protect the sleeping Pharaoh from malign forces that might lurk in the liminal space between waking and dreaming spells, were often carved onto their very headrests and bed frames. These incantations were not just for comfort. They were magical wards, ensuring that the Pharaoh's journey through the night was a safe and fruitful one, a potent time for divining the gods' wills and receiving divine guidance. Beyond the spiritual, the Pharaoh's private life also extended to the concept of the royal harem. Though this was less a forbidden place of illicit pleasures and more a structured separate area of the palace where secondary wives and numerous concubines resided. The pharaoh would visit these quarters whenever they desired a practice often aimed at ensuring a plentiful supply of potential heirs. Indeed, pharaohs like Amenhotep III and Ramses II are famously recorded as having over 100 children, a testament to the immense pressure to produce a successful royal lineage, preferably one dominated by sons. Intercourse itself was often viewed as a sacred rite, a reenactment of the creation of the cosmos, further elevating even these intimate moments to a level of divine obligation. Finally, after the banquet, the conversations, and perhaps a visit to the harem, the pharaoh would be carried aloft on a gilded palanquin, a final majestic procession to their private bedchamber. Here, for perhaps a few fleeting hours, they might experience a true dreamless sleep, a rare moment when the crushing yoke of ritual and protocol could slip away. In this hushed sanctum surrounded by protective spells, the pharaoh was for a precious moment merely human, resting before the inexorable dawn brought with it the renewed burden of divinity. The very notion of the pharaoh as a living god, while granting absolute power, also created a profoundly complex and often volatile internal world within the royal family. Beyond the meticulously choreographed public life and the sacred private rituals, a constant undercurrent of rivalry and ruthless power struggles seethed beneath the gilded surface. The most pressing duty for any pharaoh, indeed the very purpose of their existence, was to secure the succession by producing a male heir. This imperative led to practices that to our modern sensibilities seem deeply unsettling: incestuous marriages. Imagine a royal household where the lines of kinship became incredibly tangled, where the family tree was less a branching structure and more a tightly wound knot. Pharaohs routinely wed their siblings, and in some more extreme cases, even their own children, all in the name of keeping the royal bloodline pure, untainted by common ancestry. This was not a taboo. On the contrary, it was considered an essential and sacred tradition dating back to the mythical origins of their gods. After all, the very first divine couple, Osiris and Isis, were brother and sister and husband and wife. By emulating the gods' incestuous marriage, the pharaoh was believed to be upholding the cosmic order, mirroring the divine on earth. It was an act of profound religious significance, a deliberate choice to safeguard the sacred lineage that connected the living pharaoh directly to Horus and the divine pantheon. This peculiar practice, however, came at a heavy toll, both psychologically and, as modern scientific analysis has revealed, genetically. Take Tutankhamun, the boy king, we will delve into later. He was a product of an incestuous match between Akhenaten and his own sister, and the evidence points to a sickly, short-lived life riddled with congenital deformities. Studies of his remains indicate a congenitally deformed foot, a cleft palate, and possibly a rare genetic disorder, all pointing to the deleterious effects of generations of inbreeding. For the ancient Egyptians, the purity of the bloodline was far more important than genetic diversity, a grim testament to the often brutal logic of divine kingship. Within this incestuous hothouse, vicious rivalries between the pharaoh's numerous wives were an almost standard feature of palace life. The great royal wife, often the pharaoh's half-sister, would constantly be plotting and maneuvering to advance her own son's claim to the throne. The royal annals are littered with tales of intense palace intrigue, rival queens, and ruthless power plays. Think of Nefertari and Isetnofret, the prominent wives of Ramesses II, whose courts were rife with gossip, chronicling their ceaseless scheming. They would use lavish banquets to curry favor with the pharaoh, or even resort to slanderous graffiti to subtly undermine their rivals. The stakes, after all, were nothing less than the future of the dynasty, and the potential for one son to become the next living god. While Isetnofret ultimately triumphed, securing the succession for her son Merneptah, the bitterness of such rivalries could linger for generations, sometimes even manifesting in the desecration of a defeated queen's tomb. Her images hacked out in a blatant attempt to erase her from history. The crown, it seemed, was as heavy with human ambition as it was with divine gold. The high-stakes game of succession was not merely confined to the machinations of rival queens and their sons within the palace walls. The very absence of a strict, hard and fast rule of primogeniture, where the eldest son automatically inherits, meant that the throne was often a prize won through cunning political savvy and all too frequently violence. Ancient Egyptian history is replete with grim succession crises and cutthroat power struggles that would make any modern political thriller seem rather tame. Consider the unsettling case of Amenemhat Wern, the founder of the illustrious 12th dynasty. He wasn't born into royalty. He launched a coup seizing power and crowning himself pharaoh. His reign predictably was plagued by constant conspiracies and assassination attempts from those who felt they had a greater claim or simply desired the ultimate power for themselves. Perhaps most chillingly, he even faced a shadowy plot launched from within his own harem, where conspirators allegedly crept into his royal bedchamber, daggers in hand. Though he survived this particular attempt, likely thanks to loyal guards, the incident underscored the constant pervasive threat that surrounded the pharaoh, even from within their most intimate circle. In response, Amenemhat I took the unprecedented step of crowning his son, Senusret I, as co-pharaoh during his own lifetime. This unusual move was a desperate yet astute attempt to stave off further intrigues and ensure a smooth transition of power. He famously left behind a chilling piece of advice in his Instructions, a literary text: "Be on your guard against all subordinates because you cannot be sure who is plotting against you." A rather bleak piece of parenting advice, wouldn't you agree? Even later during the New Kingdom, the formidable Ramesses III, often considered the last great pharaoh of his era, faced a conspiracy that ultimately sealed his fate. He was an aging pharaoh presiding over a vast harem of hundreds of wives and concubines, a microcosm of the kingdom itself, often riven by factionalism and personal ambition. His great royal wife Tia, fueled by a desire to see her son Pentawere on the throne, orchestrated a chilling plot to assassinate Ramesses. The conspiracy involved high-ranking officials, scribes, and even the palace cupbearer. A bloody skirmish ensued within the palace, and though the details are somewhat murky, modern forensic analysis of Ramesses III's mummy has revealed a gruesome detail. His throat was slit almost certainly by an assassin in the employ of the harem conspirators. He lingered long enough to appoint his chosen heir, Ramesses IV, and to ensure that the conspirators were rounded up. The justice that followed was swift and brutal. The chief conspirators were forced to commit suicide, and the hapless Pentawere, his son, was brutally executed and denied a proper burial, ensuring his soul could not find peace in the afterlife. Even the legendary Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, was no stranger to these deadly familial conflicts. She allegedly had her own younger sister Arsinoe IV murdered to solidify her claim to the throne, a stark example of the lengths to which a pharaoh would go to secure and maintain power. The pharaoh had to walk a razor's edge, vigilantly balancing the various factions within the court, constantly watching their own back, for the threat of betrayal could emerge from the most unexpected corners. Truly, heavy was the head that wore the double crown, not just because of its physical weight, but because of the constant life-threatening pressures of maintaining divine authority in a very human world of ambition and intrigue. Beyond the intricate web of familial rivalries and political machinations, the pharaohs also had to contend with challenges from disgruntled nobles, regional governors, and even neighboring cultures who might seek to foment rebellion or exploit any perceived weakness in the divine ruler. The absence of a formal system of primogeniture meant that every succession was potentially a bloody and brutal affair, with rivals resorting to assassination, exile, or even civil war to claim the coveted throne. Consider for a moment the aftermath of a pharaoh's death. While the elaborate funerary rituals were underway, securing their passage into the afterlife, earthly power vacuums often opened up, creating fertile ground for unrest. A new pharaoh, even if designated by their predecessor, immediately faced challenges from within their own sprawling family. Brothers, uncles, and cousins who had been passed over, all harboring their own ambitions and often commanding significant personal wealth and influence. Then there were the powerful regional governors known as nomarchs, who, while theoretically subservient to the pharaoh, often wielded considerable local power, maintaining their own armies and collecting taxes. Their loyalty was constantly tested, and a weak or unpopular pharaoh could easily find their authority challenged, leading to insurrections that threatened the unity of the two lands. To counter these myriad threats, the pharaohs employed a sophisticated array of strategies, blending political savvy, military might, and the pervasive power of divine propaganda. They would shrewdly reward loyal followers with land titles and positions of power, creating a powerful network of supporters beholden to the crown. Conversely, dissent was ruthlessly suppressed. Rebellions were met with swift and decisive military action, and those deemed disloyal could face severe penalties from imprisonment to execution. This harsh reality underscored the pharaoh's ultimate authority. While they were divine conduits, they were also supreme commanders willing to wield the sword when necessary. A particularly effective method of control and legitimation was the continuous emphasis on their divine status through the construction of grand monuments. Every colossal statue, every towering obelisk, every magnificent temple emblazoned with the pharaoh's cartouche served as a tangible, awe-inspiring reminder to the populace of their living God. These were not just architectural marvels. They were immense propaganda pieces designed to instill reverence, obedience, and a sense of shared national identity centered around the divine ruler. Imagine the sheer psychological impact of standing before a temple whose gates soared higher than anything you could conceive, adorned with images of your pharaoh smiting vast armies or embracing the very gods themselves. It was an undeniable declaration of power, both earthly and divine. Even during times of peace, the pharaoh was engaged in a continuous, subtle battle for control, maintaining stability through a delicate balance of patronage and intimidation. They cultivated diplomatic relationships with neighboring powers, using trade agreements and strategic alliances to secure Egypt's borders and economic prosperity. But behind every diplomatic gesture, there was the implied threat of Egypt's military might wielded by the pharaoh himself. This relentless vigilance, this constant balancing act ensured that the pharaoh, despite their divine status, could never truly rest. The burden of the crown and the fragility of human power was a constant, if unspoken, companion even for a living God. Having explored the intricate and often brutal daily realities of the pharaoh's gilded cage, we now gently shift our focus to the very foundations upon which this divine edifice was built. For millennia, the disparate tribes of the fertile Nile Valley existed in fragmented groups, their lives dictated by the rhythm of the river and the whims of local chieftains. But then, around 3100 BCE, a transformative figure emerged, King Menes. It is Menes often associated with the legendary Narmer, who is credited with the monumental achievement of unifying these fragmented entities into a single cohesive state. You can almost feel the seismic shift in the ancient world, a pivot point where scattered settlements coalesced into a unified civilization. This wasn't merely a political unification, it was an act of profound strategic genius. Menes and his successors recognized the immense potential of the Nile's fertile floodplains, a natural bounty unparalleled in the ancient world. They harnessed the annual inundation, utilizing its rich silty deposits to transform the land into an agricultural powerhouse. This led to an unparalleled agricultural revolution, producing vast surpluses of grain that could sustain a growing, increasingly urbanized population and provide the economic backbone for ambitious projects. Imagine the meticulous planning, the communal effort required to manage such a vast and dynamic natural resource, turning the unpredictable floods into a predictable cycle of abundance. Under the unified rule of the pharaohs, Egypt burgeoned into a powerhouse of wealth, culture, and influence. This wasn't a haphazard development. The pharaohs presided over a highly centralized state supported by a sophisticated bureaucracy that managed everything from tax collection to the allocation of resources for monumental construction. This period saw groundbreaking advancements that often get overshadowed by the pyramids themselves. Think of the ox-drawn plow, an innovation that vastly increased agricultural productivity, transforming the landscape and the capacity for food production. Or the development of sailboats, which revolutionized transport along the Nile, allowing for efficient movement of goods people and crucially building materials for those very pharaonic projects. These were not simply isolated inventions. They were systemic improvements that facilitated the growth of a complex, thriving society. The pharaohs, therefore, were not just divine figures. They were also astute administrators, master planners, and symbolic unifiers who laid the groundwork for one of history's most enduring and fascinating civilizations. Their initial act of unification was the bedrock upon which all later grandeur, all the obsession with eternity, and all the elaborate daily rituals were built. It was a foundation of immense centralized power designed to control and harness the resources of the land, all under the supreme authority of the divine ruler. This initial period of consolidation set the stage for millennia of pharaonic rule, establishing the very framework that would lead to both unparalleled achievements and, as we have seen, disturbingly rigid social structures and internal conflicts. It's a reminder that even the most elaborate structures, be they physical pyramids or societal hierarchies, have a practical, often brutal origin story. As the centuries unfolded, the power of the pharaohs would be tested, affirmed, and occasionally challenged in remarkable ways. One of the most compelling and indeed unique stories in the long annals of ancient Egypt is that of Hatshepsut, a female pharaoh who, against all conventional expectations, ruled as king in her own right for over 2 decades. In a society where the king was the embodiment of the male god, Horus Hatshepsut's ascent to full pharaonic power was an extraordinary subversion of traditional gender roles, a testament to her immense political acumen and unwavering will. Hatshepsut began her career as the regent for her young stepson, Thutmose III, who was too young to rule after the death of his father, Thutmose II. But Hatshepsut was no mere placeholder. Slowly and meticulously, she began to consolidate power, adopting the masculine trappings of kingship that were so essential to the pharaonic image. You can almost visualize her gradual transformation, a careful, deliberate shedding of traditional feminine identifiers in favor of the symbols of male authority. She began to be depicted in official artwork with a beard, a stylized representation of male pharaonic power, rather than a realistic portrayal. She even dropped the feminine endings from her royal name, transforming it to better fit the established masculine nomenclature of a ruling pharaoh. This wasn't vanity. It was a profound act of self-redefinition, a clear statement that she was not merely a queen or a regent, but a true king fulfilling the divine role without compromise. Hatshepsut's reign, which spanned from approximately 1479 to 1458 BCE, was a period of immense prosperity and monumental building. Unlike many of her predecessors who focused on military conquests, Hatshepsut turned her attention to economic growth and grand architectural projects. She initiated extensive trade expeditions, most famously to the distant land of Punt, bringing back exotic goods like frankincense and myrrh, which were highly valued for religious rituals and perfumes. Her greatest architectural legacy is undoubtedly her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, a stunning terraced structure nestled against the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings. Imagine yourself standing before its elegant colonnades, a stark contrast to the more conventional monumental temples bearing witness to her refined aesthetic and her ambition to leave an indelible mark on the landscape. This temple wasn't just a tomb. It was a grand statement of her power and her unique position in the divine order. However, despite her impressive achievements and her self-proclaimed status as king, her story has a poignant postscript. After her death, her successor, Thutmose III, the very stepson for whom she had initially served as regent, went to great lengths to erase her memory and monuments. Her images were defaced, her cartouches removed from inscriptions, and her statues toppled and buried. This wasn't an act of personal malice, but rather a politically motivated attempt to restore the traditional masculine order of kingship and to prevent any future challenges to the male line of succession. It was a stark reminder of the fragile nature of even a pharaoh's legacy when the very foundations of divine gender roles were challenged. Hatshepsut's story, though partially obscured by these later erasures, remains a powerful testament to the ambition and resilience of an extraordinary woman who dared to wear the double crown, a compelling whisper across the millennia of a pharaoh who broke the mold. From the extraordinary reign of Hatshepsut, a pharaoh who subtly redefined the boundaries of kingship, we now turn to another figure who rather less subtly attempted to shatter the very foundations of Egyptian society itself. Prepare yourself for the story of Akhenaten, the pharaoh famously or perhaps infamously known as the heretic pharaoh. His reign was a brief blazing comet across the long history of Egypt, one that left a trail of chaos in its wake and fundamentally challenged millennia of deeply ingrained religious tradition. Imagine a society where the divine permeated every aspect of life, where a vast pantheon of gods, each with their specific roles and rituals, was worshipped with profound reverence. Then imagine a pharaoh, a living god himself, who decides to upend this entire sacred order. That is precisely what Akhenaten did. He proclaimed the sun disk Aten as the one true god, effectively outlawing the worship of all other deities. This wasn't merely a preference. It was a radical, almost monotheistic shift in a polytheistic world. Think of the sheer audacity, the unparalleled power required for a single individual to declare all the revered gods of their ancestors obsolete. It would be akin to suddenly declaring all major continents to be imaginary, a profound and deeply unsettling concept for the ordinary citizen. To underscore his devotion to this singular deity, Akhenaten, originally named Amenhotep IV, changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective spirit of Aten. He then made an even more dramatic statement. He moved the capital from the ancient sacred city of Thebes, bustling with its temples, to Amun and other traditional gods, to a remote desert site he called Akhetaten, horizon of the Aten, known to us today as Amarna. This was a city built from scratch, rising from the desert sands, purely for the worship of his new singular god. You can almost feel the isolation, the sense of a new world being carved out of nothing, detached from the deep historical and religious roots of the old. It was a bold, almost obsessive act of devotion. This religious revolution wasn't a peaceful transition. Akhenaten relentlessly persecuted the powerful priests of Amun, whose influence had grown immensely over centuries. Their temples were closed, their idols defaced, and their names systematically chiseled from monuments. This wasn't just a religious purge. It was a direct assault on a deeply entrenched economic and political power structure, creating a profound destabilization within the kingdom. Beyond the religious upheaval, Akhenaten's reign also saw a radical departure in artistic style. Traditional Egyptian art, with its rigid, idealized forms, was replaced by a more naturalistic, almost unsettlingly androgynous style. The pharaoh himself was depicted with an elongated skull, spindly limbs, and notably feminine hips, an artistic choice that continues to puzzle Egyptologists, perhaps reflecting a mystical union of male and female divine principles, or simply a new aesthetic vision. And it was during this period that his chief wife Nefertiti, whose famous painted limestone bust symbolizes Egyptian glamour to this day, became an icon of this new distinctive artistic era. But such radical change, especially when enforced from above, rarely lasts. Akhenaten's reign was plagued by internal turmoil and palace conspiracies, a testament to the deep-seated resistance to his reforms. After his death, which may have been around 1336 BCE, his successors wasted no time. The new capital at Amarna was quickly abandoned, left to crumble back into the desert. The old gods were swiftly restored to their former glory, the temples reopened, and the cult of Amun re-established with furious zeal. Akhenaten's monuments were systematically defaced, his name erased from royal lists, and his memory condemned to obscurity, a deliberate act of historical obliteration. His young son Tutankhamun was left with the unenviable task of picking up the pieces of a kingdom in chaos, a stark reminder that even a pharaoh's immense power, when wielded in such a revolutionary way, could ultimately lead to disaster and a forceful return to the comforting, familiar past. From the radical, world-upending reign of Akhenaten, we now turn to a pharaoh whose legacy was for millennia lost to the sands of time, only to be dramatically rediscovered in the 20th century. This is the story of Tutankhamun, the boy king, a figure whose lavish tomb discovery in 1922 ignited a global phenomenon known as Tut-mania and forever captured the modern imagination. You might recall grainy black and white photographs of Howard Carter peering into the dimly lit chambers, the glint of gold just visible in the darkness a moment that truly brought ancient Egypt back to life. The dazzling treasures unearthed from his tomb were and remain absolutely breathtaking. Imagine the iconic golden death mask, its serene gaze fixed upon eternity, inlaid with lapis lazuli and other precious stones shimmering under the archaeologist's lamp. Picture the nested coffins, each more intricately decorated than the last, culminating in the solid gold sarcophagus that cradled the young king's mummy. There were thrones crafted with exquisite artistry, ceremonial weapons, ornate furniture, and countless other grave goods offering an unprecedented, almost overwhelming glimpse into the sheer opulence of a royal burial. It was a treasure trove that spoke not just of immense wealth, but of a profound belief in securing a glorious afterlife for the pharaoh. Yet behind this glittering facade of posthumous grandeur lay a poignant and often overlooked reality. Tutankhamun was a sickly, short-lived product of an incestuous match. As we briefly touched upon earlier, modern scientific analysis, particularly through CT scans and DNA analysis of his mummy, has revealed that he was the son of Akhenaten, and unsettlingly, Akhenaten's own sister. This unfortunate lineage likely contributed to a host of congenital deformities and health issues that plagued his brief life. Imagine him a boy king, barely a man walking with a pronounced limp due to a congenitally deformed foot, navigating the vast palace with the aid of numerous canes found in his tomb. He also suffered from a cleft palate and a severe overbite, and possibly even a rare genetic disorder known as Klippel-Feil syndrome. His body, even in death, told a story of fragility and physical struggle. Tutankhamun ascended to the throne at a tender age, likely around 9 or 10 years old, inheriting a kingdom plunged into chaos by his father Akhenaten's radical religious reforms. The previous pharaoh's monotheistic experiment had alienated the powerful priesthood, destabilized the economy, and left the country in a precarious state. It was a rather heavy burden for a child to bear, wouldn't you agree? Fortunately for young Tutankhamun, he was guided by influential advisors, most notably his vizier Ai and the formidable general Horemheb. These astute pragmatists quickly set about restoring the old order. They reopened the temples dedicated to the traditional gods, particularly the powerful cult of Amun, whose priests had been so brutally suppressed by Akhenaten. The old religious festivals were re-established, and the capital was moved back to its traditional centers, effectively erasing Akhenaten's controversial legacy. During his brief reign, Tutankhamun, under the guidance of his advisors, even commissioned new building projects, including the preparations for his own tomb, though it was comparatively modest compared to those of later pharaohs due to his untimely death. He died at approximately 19 years of age, and while the exact cause has been debated for decades, recent studies suggest a combination of factors including a severe infection from a broken leg, perhaps exacerbated by a malarial infection. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, almost untouched by tomb robbers, offered not only immense material wealth, but also a unique window into the funerary practices of ancient Egypt. But perhaps even more profoundly, the story of the boy king serves as a poignant reminder of the human frailty that lay beneath the divine power. Here was a living God worshipped and revered, yet physically burdened, politically pressured, and ultimately tragically mortal. His lavish tomb, a testament to the obsession with eternity, ironically became a silent monument to his all-too-brief and challenging human existence. Following the fascinating, albeit brief, reign of Tutankhamun, the stage of Egyptian history was set for a pharaoh whose sheer longevity and monumental ambition would cement his place as one of the most iconic figures of the ancient world. This is the story of Ramesses II, universally known as Ramesses the Great. Imagine a ruler who not only presided over a kingdom at the absolute zenith of its power and splendor, but whose triumphs and even his extensive love lives were immortalized on the very temple walls across the empire, a kind of ancient permanent billboard of his greatness. Ramesses II ascended to the throne around 1279 BCE and embarked on an astonishing reign that lasted for a full 66 years. To put that in perspective, imagine a single monarch ruling for more than 2/3 of a century, witnessing generations come and go, shaping the very destiny of a civilization for what must have seemed like an eternity to his subjects. This remarkable longevity allowed him to oversee an era of unparalleled prosperity and, critically for his legacy, an almost unfathomable massive building campaign. Ramesses's thirst for glory and immortality knew no bounds. He erected temples, towering obelisks, and colossal statues across the length and breadth of the empire from Nubia in the south to the Mediterranean coast. His ambition was not merely to build, but to build bigger, grander, and more prolifically than any pharaoh before or since. His construction projects were designed with a singular overriding purpose to ensure his own glorification and immortality to have his name, his cartouche emblazoned on every conceivable surface. You could hardly walk across Egypt without stumbling upon a monument proclaiming the greatness of Ramesses II. This relentless self-promotion extended to an almost obsessive practice of usurping monuments of previous rulers. Ramesses would simply deface or destroy the names and images of earlier pharaohs and replace them with his own. One can almost picture the stonecutters meticulously carving out an earlier pharaoh's cartouche, only to painstakingly replace it with Ramesses, a bold and rather arrogant act of historical rewriting. His colossal statues, some soaring over 80 feet tall, were not just feats of engineering. They were exercises in deified narcissism designed to dwarf the human observer and instill a profound sense of awe and submission. Among his most ambitious undertakings was the sprawling tomb complex known as the Ramesseum, a massive funerary temple dedicated to his own cult and designed to serve as his eternal resting place. Here he envisioned a posthumous existence furnished with unimaginable treasures, golden chariots, exquisitely crafted furniture, gleaming alabaster vessels, and even a mummified pet lion intended to accompany him into the afterlife. Every detail was planned to ensure his eternal comfort and status, a divine mansion for the ages. Yet, this monumental building spree came at a considerable human cost. While traditional lore often speaks of slaves building the pyramids, Ramesses' projects, like those of earlier pharaohs, relied heavily on vast numbers of conscripted laborers, many of whom were peasant farmers, recruited during the annual Nile flood when their fields were underwater. These workers, along with prisoners of war, endured hard and short lives. Imagine the sheer back-breaking toil required to quarry, transport, and assemble millions of tons of stone with primitive tools, all under the relentless Egyptian sun. The blood and sweat of these commoners quite literally built Ramesses' legacy, a stark, unspoken truth beneath the gleaming surface of his monuments. Ramesses II also secured his place in history through military triumphs. Most famously, the Battle of Kadesh, a significant clash against the Hittite Empire that, though its outcome is still debated by historians, was relentlessly portrayed by Ramesses as a glorious Egyptian victory on countless temple reliefs. His reign was a testament to the absolute power of the pharaoh, a period where Egypt projected its might and influence across the ancient world. Even in death, his mummy moved and disturbed countless times throughout antiquity in attempts to protect it from tomb robbers, still reveals an imposing figure, a long aquiline nose, a strong jaw, and intriguingly, a shock of flaming red hair, a genetic trait that must have made him even more distinctive in his lifetime. His relentless self-promotion, inscribed on every stone, ensured that his name indeed lived on, echoing across the millennia as Ramesses the Great. From the grand, self-aggrandizing reign of Ramesses the Great, we gently turn the historical page to a very different kind of pharaoh, one who, for all her ancient lineage and divine claims, found herself entangled in the high-stakes political intrigues of a rapidly expanding Mediterranean world, Cleopatra VII. While earlier pharaohs focused on internal stability and monumental building, Cleopatra's story is one of a fierce, brilliant woman battling for the very survival of her kingdom against the inexorable tide of Roman power. She stands as arguably the most famous Ptolemaic pharaoh, and certainly the last. Imagine a queen who was not merely beautiful, as popular lore often suggests, but possessed a formidable intellect and a political savvy that bordered on genius. Unlike many of her Ptolemaic ancestors who clung fiercely to their Greek roots, Cleopatra made a point of learning Egyptian, a gesture that must have resonated deeply with her subjects and solidified her claim as a legitimate pharaoh. She was, in fact, the only Ptolemaic ruler to master the Egyptian language, a subtle yet powerful statement of her commitment to the land she ruled. She was also a brilliant linguist, reportedly fluent in 9 languages, an invaluable asset in the complex diplomatic landscape of her era. This allowed her to personally engage with foreign dignitaries and Roman generals, captivating them not just with charm, but with shrewd strategic thinking and a profound understanding of their political machinations. Her strategic alliances with the 2 most powerful Roman figures of her time, Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony, are the stuff of legend, but they were born out of a desperate struggle for survival. You see, by Cleopatra's era, Egypt was a shadow of its former glory, its immense wealth eyed hungrily by the burgeoning Roman Republic. Her relationships with Caesar and Antony were not mere romantic dalliances. They were calculated political gambits, attempts to preserve Egypt's independence by aligning herself with the dominant power brokers of the age. She understood that Egypt could no longer dictate terms. It had to play a nuanced game of influence and seduction, both personal and political. This was a pharaoh who understood that charisma could be as powerful a weapon as an army. She famously had herself delivered to Julius Caesar rolled up in a carpet, a dramatic entrance designed to bypass her enemies and make an unforgettable first impression. And it worked. She bore Caesar a son, Caesarion, a direct link to the most powerful man in Rome, a desperate hope for Egypt's continued sovereignty. After Caesar's assassination, she turned her attention to Mark Antony, forming another powerful alliance against his rival Octavian. The love affair, as it is often portrayed, was undeniably passionate, but beneath the surface lay a clear pragmatic strategy for securing her throne and protecting her dynasty. However, even the most astute political maneuvering and the most captivating personal charm could not ultimately withstand the might of Rome. Cleopatra had, in essence, picked the losing side in the titanic Roman civil war between Mark Antony and Octavian. Her tragic demise in 30 BCE after the devastating defeat at the Battle of Actium marked the definitive end of the pharaonic line, and indeed the end of ancient Egypt as an independent kingdom. Rather than suffer the humiliation of being paraded as a captive in a Roman triumph, she took her own life, allegedly, by the bite of a poisonous asp. This final act, a defiance even in defeat, only solidified her legend. Her story, passed down through centuries, has often been romanticized and sensationalized, but at its core, it reveals a pharaoh who, though a product of an incestuous dynasty and the last of her kind, possessed an extraordinary blend of intelligence, ambition, and a poignant determination to preserve her ancient land in a rapidly changing world. She was a pharaoh of a new age, where divine power had to contend with very real geopolitical forces. A fascinating, if ultimately sorrowful, testament to the disturbing pressures that even a living god could face when their world began to crumble. Cleopatra VII's story is the culmination of a fascinating, often tumultuous period in Egyptian history, the Ptolemaic dynasty. This era, spanning nearly 3 centuries from 305 BCE to 30 BCE, saw Egypt transition from an independent, self-contained empire to a powerful yet ultimately vulnerable player on the wider Mediterranean stage. It was a time of foreign invasion, cultural fusion, and, as we've seen, dramatic internal intrigue that ultimately brought the curtain down on the age of the pharaohs. Imagine a succession of powerful empires sweeping across the Near East. Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, and Persians had all at various times asserted their dominance over Egypt, a testament to its immense wealth and strategic location. But the arrival of Alexander the Great in 332 BCE heralded a new and profound shift. Alexander, the charismatic Macedonian conqueror, swept into Egypt, and rather than imposing foreign rule, was shrewdly crowned pharaoh in Memphis, embracing the ancient traditions to legitimize his authority over the newly acquired territory. He founded the city of Alexandria, a vibrant cosmopolitan center that would become a beacon of Greek culture and learning for centuries, complete with its legendary library and lighthouse. Alexander's untimely death in 323 BCE, without a clear successor, plunged his vast empire into a series of brutal wars among his generals known as the Diadochi. It was during this chaotic period that Ptolemy I Soter, one of Alexander's most trusted generals, seized control of Egypt. He crowned himself pharaoh in 305 BCE, establishing the Ptolemaic dynasty that would rule for an astonishing 275 years. This marked a unique period of cultural fusion where Greek and Egyptian traditions intertwined in fascinating ways. The Ptolemaic pharaohs, while resolutely Greek in their language administration and much of their culture, understood the necessity of adopting Egyptian royal traditions and religious practices to legitimize their rule in the eyes of their subjects. They continued the practice of building grand temples in the traditional Egyptian style like those at Edfu and Philae, but often added Greek flourishes blending the aesthetics of both worlds. Ptolemy II. Philadelphus even instituted the worship of a deified Alexander, cleverly integrating their Macedonian heritage into the Egyptian pantheon. However, despite these gestures, they remained distinctively Greek. They continued the practice of marrying their siblings, a tradition they observed even more rigidly than their Egyptian predecessors, and they maintained Greek names, a stark contrast to the native Egyptian pharaohs. This blend of cultures, however, did not always translate to stability. The Ptolemaic court was a hotbed of intrigue and power struggles, perhaps even more volatile than the native Egyptian dynasties. The death of Ptolemy IV in 204 BCE, for instance, left a young son, Ptolemy V, who was not even 6 years old, as heir. The regents, Agathocles and Sosibius, desperate to secure their positions, went to the brutal extreme of murdering Queen Arsinoe, Ptolemy V's own mother. This act of blatant regicide, however, was so egregious that it outraged the common people, leading to an unprecedented popular uprising. The citizens of Alexandria besieged the palace, demanded justice, and ultimately lynched the regents in a display of raw, unfiltered fury. This incident was a stark reminder that even the Ptolemaic pharaohs, though styled as god kings in the Egyptian tradition, were ultimately human and profoundly vulnerable to the will of their subjects, especially when their actions defied the cosmic order. Despite the political turmoil, the Ptolemaic era was also a period of immense cultural and intellectual achievement. It was during this time that much of Egyptian culture and religion was compiled and codified for posterity. The great library of Alexandria became the intellectual heart of the ancient world, and it was here that the Egyptian priest-scribe Manetho compiled his Egyptiaca, the first comprehensive list of pharaohs, organizing them into the 30 dynasties we still use today. Even curious texts, like the Dream Book from the papyrus Chester Beatty, emerged from this period, listing nearly 200 dreams and their interpretations, from the mundane eating figs equals money to the sinister burned alive equals danger, offering a unique window into the ancient Egyptian psyche. Ultimately, the Ptolemaic dynasty, for all its cultural innovations and intellectual brilliance, ended with Cleopatra's death. Egypt, the last great independent kingdom of the ancient Near East, finally became a Roman province, bringing to a close over 3,000 years of pharaonic rule. It was a rather ignominious end to such a magnificent line of divine rulers, a final definitive statement on the changing tide of power in the ancient world. Having delved into the lives and legacies of specific pharaohs and the broader historical context of their reigns, we now turn our attention to the overarching obsession that shaped much of their existence, profoundly impacting their daily lives, their governance, and the very landscape of Egypt, their fixation on death and the afterlife. This wasn't merely a belief. It was the driving force behind the construction of colossal monuments, the development of intricate rituals, and in earlier periods, some truly disturbing practices. Imagine a world where your earthly existence was viewed not as an end in itself, but as a fleeting prelude to a glorious eternal existence. For the pharaohs, this was a deeply held conviction. They believed that their divine essence, their very being, as the embodiment of Horus, would live on in the afterlife, merging with the gods in an eternal paradise known as the Field of Reeds. But this wasn't an automatic entry. To achieve this desired immortality to ensure a well-provisioned and blissful existence for eternity. Their physical body had to be preserved, and their earthly power and status had to be meticulously replicated and protected in the tomb. This profound belief system meant that immense resources, both human and material capital, were bent towards securing this forever. The specter of death and eternity was not a gloomy thought to be avoided. It was a constant companion, a driving force behind every major decision, every grand project. This quest for immortality manifested most visibly in the colossal monuments that define ancient Egypt, the pyramids. These weren't just elaborate tombs. They were awe-inspiring feats of engineering designed to project godlike power and, more importantly, to serve as resurrection machines. Take the Great Pyramid of Giza, constructed for Pharaoh Khufu around 2550 BCE. Imagine a structure soaring over 480 feet tall, composed of over 2 million meticulously cut limestone blocks, each weighing more than 2 tons. For almost 4,000 years, it remained the tallest man-made structure on Earth, a testament to the staggering logistics and labor involved. An estimated 20,000 workers toiling for 27 years meticulously quarried, transported, and assembled these massive stones with astonishing precision using only primitive tools. It was an appalling yet undeniably magnificent display of power and self-aggrandizement, all dedicated to one man's journey into eternity. The pyramids were more than just repositories for the dead. Every aspect was suffused with religious symbolism. From their alignment with the cardinal points to the funerary spells known as the pyramid texts, carved within their internal passages. These texts were essentially a script for the pharaoh's afterlife journey, guiding them through trials and tribulations to the blissful field of reeds. The smooth angled sides of the pyramids, once clad in polished white limestone, would have shone like a prism in the desert sun, a radiant beacon guiding Khufu's soul to its celestial home. Inside narrow passages led to the king's burial chamber, its walls lined with massive granite blocks fitted so tightly they seemed to defy logic, all designed to seal the pharaoh securely for their journey. The human cost, of course, was immense. Overseen by figures like Hemiunu Khufu's cousin and chief architect, the construction was managed like a military campaign, and accidents and deaths were accepted as an unavoidable part of the divine endeavor. Workers were buried in cemeteries in the shadow of the very pyramids they helped build their lives, a fleeting footnote to the pharaoh's eternal ambition. The pharaoh's tomb was designed to be a secure staging ground for their journey to immortality, a symbol of divine power and a guarantee of eternal life. The alignment of the pyramids with stars like Orion and Sirius, believed to be the celestial homes of Osiris and Isis, further underscored their profound spiritual significance. Each complex system of passages, chambers, and even rudimentary booby traps was painstakingly designed not only for ritual purposes, but also to protect against the ever-present threat of tomb robbers who shared the pharaoh's interest in the material wealth of the afterlife, albeit for different reasons. This obsession with eternal life shaped not just the pharaoh's destiny, but the very landscape of Egypt itself, leaving behind an astonishing legacy of human endeavor driven by a cosmic belief. While the monumental pyramids speak volumes about the pharaoh's ambition for the afterlife, the meticulous and elaborate process of mummification offers an even more intimate glimpse into their obsession with preserving the physical body as an eternal vessel. For the pharaoh, preparation for death began long before their final breath. Work on their tomb could span decades, consuming immense resources and human labor throughout their reign. Imagine the pharaoh himself, perhaps in their prime, intimately involved in the planning and design of their future eternal home, selecting its location, dictating its layout, and even overseeing its elaborate decorations. Simultaneously, they would accumulate a vast array of grave goods and treasures, exquisite furniture, fine clothing, shimmering jewelry, formidable weapons, and even vast quantities of food and drink, all intended to provision them for an eternal life mirroring their earthly existence. The mummification process itself was a long and complex endeavor, often taking up to 70 days, a period of profound spiritual significance. It was an intricate ritual designed to transform the mortal body into a perfect preserved form ready for its journey to the afterlife. The first and perhaps most unsettling step involved the removal of internal organs. The brain was often extracted through the nostrils using a long hooked instrument, then discarded. The heart, believed to be the seat of intelligence and emotion, was typically left in place, but other organs, the lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines, were carefully removed, washed, and then placed in canopic jars, each lid carved in the likeness of one of the 4 sons of Horus, who protected these vital organs. Following evisceration, the body was thoroughly dried out using natron salts, a natural desiccant. This process of desiccation was crucial to prevent decomposition, stripping the body of its moisture and ensuring its preservation. After approximately 40 days, the natron would be removed and the shriveled body carefully cleaned and plumped with linen sawdust or other packing materials to restore a lifelike appearance. Then came the meticulous process of wrapping. The body was carefully swaddled in countless layers of linen bandages, often hundreds of yards of fine linen, each strip meticulously applied, sometimes impregnated with resins for further preservation and magical protection. Amulets and protective charms would be placed between the layers, imbued with spells and prayers to ward off evil and ensure safe passage. Finally, the face was often covered with a lifelike mask exquisitely crafted from gold and precious stones, a visual representation of the pharaoh in their idealized eternal form. This entire process was overseen by embalmers, a special class of priests who understood not only the practicalities of preservation, but also the profound spiritual significance of each step. They would recite special prayers and incantations throughout the process, imbuing the mummy with magical properties and ensuring its safe passage into the afterlife. Once complete, the mummy would be placed in a series of nested coffins, the innermost often made of solid gold like Tutankhamun's, and then secured within a massive stone sarcophagus. The funerary procession itself was a grand, solemn affair. The sarcophagus, perhaps transported on a sled, would be drawn by oxen or men, accompanied by chanting priests, wailing mourners, and a retinue of officials. Upon arrival at the tomb, the sarcophagus would be lowered into the burial chamber, surrounded by an astonishing array of grave goods, the furniture, clothing, jewelry, food, and other necessities for the afterlife. The tomb walls would be covered with vibrant frescoes and intricate carvings depicting scenes from the pharaoh's life, religious texts, and maps of the underworld, all designed to guide the deceased ruler on their eternal journey. As the Old Kingdom gave way to later periods, the fashion for colossal pyramids eventually fell out of favor, perhaps due to the increasing efforts of tomb robbers. Later, pharaohs, especially those of the New Kingdom, abandoned the exposed grandeur of pyramids in favor of tombs carved deep into the mountains, specifically in the Valley of the Kings. These sprawling rocky tunnel systems, designed to foil robbers with their hidden chambers and elaborate corridors, became the new standard for royal burials, a testament to the pharaoh's unending quest to safeguard their immortality against the relentless greed of plunderers. And indeed, many tombs were plundered and desecrated over the millennia, leaving Tutankhamun's relatively intact discovery as a remarkable exception, a poignant testament to the ongoing struggle between the pharaoh's obsession with eternity and the equally persistent human desire for worldly gain. Perhaps one of the most unsettling revelations about the early pharaoh's obsession with the afterlife is the chilling, often overlooked practice of retainer sacrifice. While it might seem a barbaric custom to our modern sensibilities for the ancient Egyptians of the early dynasties, it was disturbingly common. Imagine the absolute power of a pharaoh so immense that it was believed they could command obedience and service even beyond the grave. This belief led to the ritual slaughter of dozens, sometimes hundreds of servants, courtiers, and even animals, all destined to accompany their divine master into eternity. Archaeologists have unearthed fascinating, if grim, evidence of these retainer sacrifices in the tombs of early kings like Jer and Jet from the First Dynasty dating back to around 3000 BCE. Around their grand royal tombs at Abydos, subsidiary graves were discovered arranged in neat rows. These weren't just empty pits. They contained the bodies of servants, their earthly possessions, food, furniture, simple jewelry tools, laid out beside them as if awaiting their master's command. In the tomb of King Jer, for instance, a staggering 318 subsidiary burials were found, each body carefully positioned, almost as if still standing guard or preparing to serve. Imagine the scene: individuals whose lives were perhaps considered mere extensions of the pharaoh's divine will, deliberately killed to ensure their master's comfort and continued authority in the afterlife. This wasn't seen as a punishment, but rather an honor. To accompany the king into eternity was considered the ultimate privilege, a guarantee of continued service to a living God in the blissful field of reeds. You can almost feel the cultural weight of this belief, the profound indoctrination that must have convinced individuals that such a fate was not only acceptable, but desirable. The victims were likely killed by strangulation or a sharp blow to the head. Their bodies hastily mummified, perhaps with less care than the pharaoh themselves, and then interred, sometimes in simple coffins, some even bearing their own names, a small echo of their individuality in the shadow of the colossal royal tomb. This practice, however, represented a staggering loss of life in the name of royal luxury, a dark stain on the early legacy of the pharaohs. Beyond human retainers, animal sacrifice and burial were also unsettlingly common. The pharaohs desired companionship and sustenance in the afterlife, not just from humans, but from their beloved creatures. Mummified pets, dogs, cats, monkeys, and even gazelles have been found in royal tombs. King Hor-Aha, for instance, was interred with 10 donkeys, presumably for transport in the afterlife. King Narmer was accompanied by 10 dogs, and Pharaoh Wajga by 12 baboons, animals sacred to the god Thoth. Even Ramesses II, later in the New Kingdom, was interred with his beloved pet cat, a poignant, if slightly bizarre touch that speaks to the deeper human connection even the divine pharaohs held. Perhaps even more bizarre were some of the other grave goods intended to serve the pharaoh's needs. Archaeological discoveries have revealed vast catacombs beneath the temple of Anubis at Saqqara, containing millions of animal mummies, and even more curiously, tons of human hair. This hair, believed to be shorn from servants and courtiers, was offered to Anubis, the god of mummification, to aid the pharaoh's safe journey. Tens of thousands of human hair wigs, made from the shorn locks of courtiers and slaves, have also been found in some tombs like that of Amunhotep II. The belief was that the pharaoh would need a fresh coiffure in the afterlife, and that hair, having magical properties, was a sign of vitality and power. Imagine a grand wig, meticulously styled, waiting for its divine wearer in the chambers of the underworld. Thankfully, this shocking and horrifying practice of human retainer sacrifice began to die out by the end of the Old Kingdom, perhaps due to changing theological interpretations or the rising cost of such extensive burials. It was eventually replaced by more symbolic ways of ensuring eternal service, most notably through the use of Shabti figurines. These small, often blue-glazed ceramic or wooden figures were inscribed with a magical spell that would magically bring them to life in the afterlife, serving as eternal servants for the pharaoh performing any necessary labor. This transition, while still reflecting the desire for eternal service, thankfully spared countless human lives, a small glimmer of progress in the disturbing practices surrounding the pharaoh's quest for immortality. Despite the relentless march of time, the ravages of tomb robbers, and the shifting sands of millennia, the pharaohs continue to reveal their secrets, albeit slowly and often through the lens of modern scientific inquiry. Our understanding of their disturbing lives, their illnesses, their family trees, and the very structure of their society has been profoundly deepened by the advent of modern archaeological techniques. Imagine the thrill of archaeologists in the 21st century, not just uncovering artifacts, but virtually unwrapping ancient kings and queens with a precision that Howard Carter could only have dreamt of. Foremost among these techniques are CT scans and DNA analysis. These non-invasive methods have allowed researchers to peer into the very bodies of mummified pharaohs, revealing details that even the most meticulous embalmers could not hide. We now know, for instance, the extent of the inbred genetic deformities that plagued Tutankhamun's family line, confirming suspicions that had lingered for decades. The scans revealed his club foot, his cleft palate, and other vulnerabilities, painting a picture of a physically challenged young man, rather than the idealized divine ruler often depicted in art. Furthermore, these techniques have allowed us to pinpoint festering wounds, bone infections, and even traces of malaria parasites, providing strong evidence that a combination of these ailments likely claimed Tutankhamun's young life at merely 19 years old. This level of detail allows us to move beyond myth and legend, providing concrete medical insights into the frailty that often lay beneath the divine facade. Beyond the individual pharaohs, modern archaeology continues to unravel the broader secrets of their civilization. Isotope analysis, for example, allows researchers to trace complex trade networks by examining the chemical composition of artifacts and even human remains. By analyzing isotopes in teeth and bones, scientists can determine where individuals grew up or the geographical origin of certain materials, revealing the vast distances over which goods and ideas traveled under pharaonic rule. Inscriptions and papyri, carefully preserved in the dry desert climate, continue to be painstakingly translated, painting increasingly vivid pictures of cutthroat palace politics, revealing the intricate dances of foreign concubines and scheming viziers who jostled for influence and power within the royal court. These documents bring to life the human drama that unfolded behind the scenes of divine rule. The endless fascination with the pharaohs is in many ways an acknowledgement that despite all these incredible discoveries, much still remains profoundly unknown. You might ask yourself, what was the true nature of their relationships with their numerous queens and hundreds of children? How did they wield their immense power behind closed doors, away from the ceremonial gaze of their subjects? And what truly awaited them in the afterlife beyond the meticulously provisioned tombs? These are questions that, despite the brilliance of modern science and the dedication of countless archaeologists, may never be fully answered. The pharaohs in their very essence remain shrouded in a veil of mystery, a tantalizing enigma that continues to beckon us into the depths of their ancient world. As we conclude our deep dive into the lives of these complex, often disturbing figures, it's important to reflect on the immense human cost of their ambition. While we have focused primarily on the pharaohs themselves, their daily lives, their power struggles, their obsession with eternity, it is crucial to remember that their opulent existence and their monumental legacies were built on the backs of millions of common people. It is to their often grim, yet remarkably resilient lives that we now turn our focus, a stark contrast to the gilded cages we have explored thus far. Having immersed ourselves in the glittering yet often disturbing world of the pharaohs, it is crucial now to turn our gaze downwards to the vast anonymous millions upon whose labor and lives their divine reign was built. This is the stark, often grim reality of the common people, the silent majority whose daily existence formed the bedrock of ancient Egyptian civilization. For every glittering crown, for every colossal statue, for every meticulously preserved mummy, there was an immeasurable human cost paid not in gold, but in sweat toil and often brutal hardship. Imagine yourself not as a king, but as a peasant farmer living in a small mud brick dwelling along the Nile. Your home would be humble, a single room perhaps with a straw mat on the floor serving as your bed. No memory foam, no Egyptian cotton sheets here, just the hard-packed earth beneath you, often damp from the proximity to the life-giving yet sometimes unforgiving river. You wake before dawn, not to the serenade of blind musicians, but to the insistent braying of a donkey or the bleating of a goat, perhaps the cry of a hungry child. The air would be thick with the smell of wood smoke from your meager cooking fire, mixed with the ever-present scent of the Nile's fertile silt, and perhaps the less appealing aroma of animal waste and unwashed bodies. Your feet, accustomed to the rough terrain, would quickly become part of the ecosystem of dust and mud. Your entire life, your very survival was inextricably linked to the annual inundation of the Nile. This was the lifeblood of Egypt, bringing fertile silt to renew the fields, but it also dictated the rhythm of your year. For several months, when the river swelled and flooded the agricultural lands, farming became impossible. It was during this period of forced idleness from their fields that vast armies of workers, primarily peasant farmers, were recruited for the pharaoh's grand projects. This was not voluntary in the sense we understand it today. It was a form of corvée labor, a state-mandated service, a grim and undeniable part of their civic duty. While popular lore often depicts these workers as slaves, archaeological evidence suggests that many, if not most, were indeed paid workers, but paid in ancient Egypt often meant rations of grain beer and a basic shelter, a subsistence wage, rather than a comfortable living. The work itself was back-breaking, literally bone-crushing. Imagine yourself on the construction site of a pyramid or a colossal temple. The sun, an unforgiving deity in its own right, beat down mercilessly from dawn till dusk. The air would be thick with dust, the constant chatter of overseers, and the rhythmic grunts of thousands of men hauling immense stones. These weren't lightweight building blocks. As we noted, some weighed several tons, quarried from distant sites, transported on barges across the Nile, and then dragged across the desert on sledges by sheer human force, perhaps aided by lubricated tracks and immense wooden levers. The physical toll was immense. Modern scans of skeletal remains from workers' cemeteries discovered in the shadow of the very pyramids they built paint a grim picture. They show high rates of arthritis, severe injuries and stress fractures, undeniable evidence of the brutal impact of their labor. Many suffered from back problems, broken bones, and joint degeneration, a testament to the repetitive heavy lifting. Life expectancy for these laborers was short, and their final resting places were simple pit graves, a stark, profound contrast to the elaborate eternal mansions they toiled to construct for their divine rulers. The human cost of the Pharaoh's ambition truly was immense. The blood, sweat, and very lives of these commoners literally built the enduring legacy of the pharaohs, a silent testament inscribed not in hieroglyphs on temple walls, but in the very bones of the unseen multitudes. Beyond the back-breaking labor demanded by the pharaoh's monumental projects, the daily life of the common Egyptian was a constant, precarious struggle against the vagaries of nature and the necessities of survival. Your diet, for instance, would be simple, almost monotonous. The staple was barley bread, flat and often gritty from residual sand from the grinding stones, a far cry from the pharaoh's delicate delicacies. Along with this, a simple beer brewed from barley would provide both sustenance and a safe source of hydration in a world where clean drinking water was a luxury. Your meals would be supplemented by onions, lentils, a few vegetables grown in your small garden plot, and occasionally a piece of fish caught from the Nile. Meat would be a rare luxury reserved for special festivals or a particularly successful hunt, a stark contrast to the choicest cuts of beef and fowl enjoyed by the royal court. Imagine the constant gnawing worry of securing enough food for your family, knowing that a poor harvest or a low Nile flood could mean the difference between meager subsistence and outright starvation. Your clothing would be minimal and practical, designed for the hot climate and your laborious lifestyle. Simple linen kilts for men, or plain tunics for women, often undyed and unadorned, would be your everyday attire. While the pharaoh adorned themselves with shimmering gold and electrum, your embellishments would likely be a simple string of beads, or perhaps a woven bracelet cherished for its personal meaning rather than its material value. Footwear would be rudimentary at best, often just sandals made of papyrus or leather if you were fortunate. Most of your day would be spent barefoot, feeling the earth, the mud, the dust beneath you, your feet developing a resilience that few modern souls could match. Health was a constant concern, often a matter of sheer luck. Without the benefit of royal physicians and priests dedicated to your well-being, your body was a canvas of constant ailments. Life expectancy was considerably shorter than for the elite, often not much beyond 30 or 40 years for the common man. Imagine suffering from chronic dental issues, tooth decay from the gritty bread or abscesses that could lead to excruciating pain and infection with no dentist to turn to. Parasitic diseases spread by the very Nile waters that nourished your fields would be common, leading to debilitating fevers and weakness. Injuries from agricultural work or construction were frequent, and without modern medicine, even a simple cut could become infected, leading to a lingering illness or even death. Childbirth was fraught with peril for both mother and child, and infant mortality rates were tragically high. The concept of pain management beyond herbal remedies would be alien to you. You simply endured, a testament to the quiet strength and stoicism born of necessity. Even forms of entertainment, while present, were modest and communal. After a long day of toil, you might gather with your family and neighbors, sharing stories, perhaps listening to simple music played on a flute or drum. Children would play games with carved pieces of wood or clay figures, mimicking the daily routines of their elders. Festivals often tied to the agricultural cycle or religious observances would offer a rare respite, a chance to gather, feast on slightly better food, and participate in communal celebrations, a brief escape from the relentless grind. There were no elaborate banquets with dancing girls or private performances of acrobats. Your entertainment was simpler, rooted in community and shared experience, a quiet joy found in moments of reprieve. And hovering above all this, a constant unspoken dread, the fear of famine, of disease, of external threats. While the pharaoh was responsible for maintaining cosmic order, for ensuring prosperity, and warding off chaos for the commoner, these were very real immediate dangers. A prolonged drought, a particularly virulent plague, or the distant rumblings of a foreign army were not abstract concepts. They were ever-present possibilities that could shatter your precarious existence in an instant. Your trust, and indeed your very survival, rested on the divine power of the pharaoh, a colossal weight placed on the shoulders of one who, for all their divinity, remained a human in their choices and their limitations. This constant tension between divine promise and earthly struggle was the silent, often disturbing reality of ancient Egyptian life, a profound juxtaposition that underpinned every aspect of their monumental civilization. The meticulous planning and sheer scale of the pharaoh's eternal resting places, while awe-inspiring, also inadvertently created a new profession, one steeped in stealth danger and a relentless pursuit of illicit riches, tomb robbing. Imagine, if you will, the immense effort that went into constructing a pharaoh's tomb, the thousands of workers, the years of labor, the intricate booby traps, the curses inscribed on the walls, all designed to secure the pharaoh's passage to the afterlife and to protect their vast hoard of treasures. Yet almost from the moment the final stone was laid, another silent, shadowy industry began its work, driven by a desire for wealth that rivaled the pharaoh's own. You might think that the sanctity of a pharaoh's tomb, imbued with divine power and protected by powerful curses, would deter even the most hardened criminal. But human greed, it seems, knows no such bounds. The vast wealth interred with the pharaohs, the gold, the jewels, the precious metals, the exquisite artifacts, represented an irresistible temptation to those desperate or bold enough to risk the wrath of the gods and the severe penalties of the earthly authorities. Tomb robbing was a highly organized criminal enterprise, often involving generations of families who honed their skills, passing down knowledge of tomb construction, secret passages, and even the best tools for breaching ancient stone. Think of the sheer audacity required. Imagine a group of robbers under the cover of night, perhaps during a sandstorm, that would obscure their tracks, navigating the treacherous desert terrain to reach a hidden tomb in the Valley of the Kings. They would then face ingenious traps, false walls, collapsing ceilings, disguised entrances. Yet they persisted, driven by the promise of unimaginable wealth. The historical records are replete with accounts of tomb robberies, some dating back only a few decades after the pharaohs were interred. Official documents, such as the Abbot Papyrus from the reign of Ramesses IX, meticulously detail the investigations into tomb desecrations, listing the pharaohs whose eternal rest had been violently disturbed. It's a rather sobering read, providing a grim counter-narrative to the pharaoh's grand plans for immortality. Indeed, even Tutankhamun's tomb, famously discovered largely intact in 1922, was not entirely untouched. Archaeological evidence clearly shows that it had been robbed at least twice in antiquity, shortly after his burial. The robbers were perhaps caught or scared off, leaving behind most of the treasures, but their presence was undeniable. This relentless pursuit of the afterlife's riches underscores a fascinating paradox. The pharaoh's obsession with eternity was matched only by the greed of the plunderers, a persistent human flaw that transcended divine power. The discovery of the royal cache at Deir el-Bahari in 1881 offers a vivid illustration of this ongoing battle between preservation and plunder. Here, a hidden tomb was found containing the mummies of over 40 pharaohs, queens, and nobles, including those of Seti III and Ramesses II, carefully reinterred by priests centuries after their original burials had been threatened or looted. Imagine the scene: priests desperate to protect the sacred remains of their divine rulers from relentless thieves, discreetly moving the mummies from one hiding place to another, a grim game of hide-and-seek played out over centuries. Ramesses II's mummy, for instance, had been moved at least 3 times before its final resting place in the cache. When Gaston Maspero finally unwrapped Ramesses II's mummy in 1886, he found it in a surprisingly poor condition, not due to decay, but from the brutal handling it had endured during its numerous reburials and previous attempts at desecration. The body was broken in places, some bones missing, and a gaping hole in the skull likely from an ancient act of desecration rather than the mummification process itself. Yet even in this state, his imposing figure with his aquiline nose and strong jaw was still evident, a testament to his regal bearing, even in death. Today, this mummy, along with many others, rests in the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization in Cairo, a testament to both their ancient power and their enduring vulnerability to human ambition. The silent struggle between sacred resting and profane pilfering truly adds another unsettling layer to the disturbing lives of the pharaohs. The common people's lives were not only defined by relentless labor and precarious survival, but also by a profound and pervasive fear of divine displeasure and the unseen forces that shaped their world. While the pharaoh stood as the ultimate mediator between gods and men for the ordinary Egyptian, the pantheon of deities was far more immediate and far more demanding than a distant divine king. Imagine living in a world where every rustle of the wind, every unusual animal sighting, every dream could be interpreted as a message from the gods or a warning from malevolent spirits. This pervasive spirituality, while offering comfort and explanation for the inexplicable, also fostered a deep-seated anxiety about offending the divine. Your daily rituals would be simple personal acts of piety. You might leave a small offering of bread or beer at a local shrine dedicated to a household god, or wear an amulet to ward off evil. You would pray to deities like Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess, for a safe childbirth, or Bes, the dwarf god, to protect your children from evil. The common man didn't build grand temples. Their worship was more intimate, woven into the fabric of everyday life, a constant negotiation with the divine for protection and good fortune. Think of the sheer mental energy expended on placating unseen forces, on ensuring you did not incur the wrath of a vengeful deity for some unintentional slight. Disease, for instance, was not merely a physical ailment. It was often seen as a punishment from the gods, or the work of malevolent demons. If a child fell ill with a fever, it wasn't just a medical crisis. It was a spiritual one, prompting desperate prayers offerings, and perhaps even the consultation of a local wise woman or priest who might interpret the divine will or offer a magical cure. The constant presence of parasitic infections, the debilitating effects of malnutrition, and the rapid spread of epidemics meant that life was frequently interrupted by suffering, a suffering often attributed to forces beyond human control. Superstition played a much larger role in your daily decisions than logic. You might avoid certain paths after dark for fear of encountering restless spirits. You would meticulously observe omens, the flight of birds, the shape of a cloud, a strange sound in the night. The pharaoh might have access to elaborate dream books and priests who interpreted their visions, but for you a disturbing dream might lead to days of worry, prompting desperate attempts to understand its meaning and avert its potential negative consequences. Imagine the weight of every fleeting thought, every mundane occurrence potentially holding a deeper, unsettling meaning. Furthermore, the legal system, while theoretically based on Ma'at, the cosmic principle of justice and balance, was a far cry from modern concepts of due process. While ordinary citizens could bring complaints before local courts, corruption among lower officials was common. And ultimately, your fate rested on the judgment of a system designed to serve the pharaoh's order. If you were accused of a crime, especially one that touched upon royal property or challenged authority, the consequences could be swift and brutal. Punishments included flogging, mutilation, or even death executed publicly as a deterrent. The threat of forced labor on royal projects was always present, a constant reminder that your body and your time ultimately belonged to the pharaoh. This pervasive fear and a constant awareness of the precariousness of their existence meant that the common people lived in a state of perpetual vigilance, their lives dictated by forces far greater than themselves. The unpredictable Nile, the demanding gods, and the all-powerful Pharaoh. Their silent endurance, their unwavering faith in a system that offered them so little comfort, yet demanded so much, is perhaps the most profound and disturbing aspect of ancient Egyptian society. They were the anonymous foundation upon which a glorious eternal legacy was built, their individual struggles often lost in the shadows of the monumental structures they created. As we gently bring our journey through the disturbing lives of the pharaohs to a close, a powerful truth emerges from the sands of time, the profound, almost unfathomable chasm that separated the divine ruler from the common person. We have explored the pharaoh's existence within a gilded cage, a life defined by unparalleled opulence, sacred ritual constant, political intrigue, and an overwhelming obsession with eternal life. We have seen them as living gods imbued with absolute authority, their every action imbued with cosmic significance, their very dreams considered divine communions. They built colossal monuments that defied human scale, commanded armies that conquered distant lands, and navigated a world where even incest was considered a sacred act to preserve their divine bloodline. Yet, as we contrasted this with the grim realities of the common Egyptian, a different, more somber picture solidified. For every glittering crown there was a head shaved to avoid lice. For every sumptuous banquet, a family whose staple was gritty bread and beer. While the pharaoh worried about their soul merging with Ra, the common farmer worried about the unpredictable Nile and the next harvest. The lavish burial of a pharaoh filled with golden chariots and Shabti servants stood in stark relief against the simple pit graves of those who had labored to build those very tombs. The very human cost of the pharaoh's quest for immortality, paid in sweat, blood, and abbreviated lives, is a silent, enduring testament to the disturbing power dynamics of ancient Egypt. This societal structure enabling such extreme disparities was not accidental. It was a carefully maintained system cemented by propaganda, religious doctrine, and, when necessary, brutal force. The pharaoh's divine status was the ultimate justification for everything from the back-breaking corvée labor that built the pyramids to the acceptance of retainer sacrifices in earlier dynasties. You were born into your station, and your life's purpose was often framed around serving the divine order represented by your living God-King. This unquestioning acceptance, born of millennia of tradition and the omnipresent threat of chaos, allowed the pharaohs to wield their power with a detachment that seems chilling to our modern minds. Consider for a moment the psychological implications of this system. For the pharaoh, the crushing burden of maintaining Ma'at, the constant vigilance against internal plots, and the unending pressure to secure a perfect afterlife must have been immense. It was a life of profound isolation at the apex of power, a constant performance of divinity, with very little room for genuine human frailty or error. For the commoner, the struggle for daily survival combined with a deep-seated reverence and fear of the divine meant a life of quiet endurance of hope pinned on the successful rituals of a distant ruler and an acceptance of hardships as part of the natural divinely ordained order. The pharaohs, in their disturbing blend of godlike authority and very human struggles, leave us with a powerful legacy. Their monuments still stand majestic testaments to their ambition and the skill of their people. Their mummies brought forth from the depths of their tombs continue to whisper secrets of their lives, their illnesses, and their unique place in history. And the stories of their intrigues, their triumphs, and their ultimate vulnerability to the march of time remind us that even the most powerful figures are, in the end, products of their era, shaped by beliefs and practices that often appear deeply disturbing when viewed through the lens of another age. It's a quiet, profound reflection on the nature of power divinity and the enduring human spirit, both grand and humble, that continues to resonate across the millennia. As the final grains of sand settle on our journey through ancient Egypt, and the echoes of pharaohs, both divine and disturbingly human, begin to fade, allow your thoughts to drift. The weight of the double crown, the relentless sun on the backs of the laborers, the chilling whispers of palace intrigue, all these images so vivid for a time can now gently recede into the quiet expanse of your mind. You are here in the present, safe and warm. No vast river to flood your fields, no pharaoh demanding your eternal service. The anxieties of Ma'at, the relentless quest for an eternal resting place, the constant threat of rival queens. These are but distant echoes from a world long past. Feel the comfort of your own bed, the softness of your pillow, a luxury those ancient figures could only dream of even in their most opulent slumber. Let the stories of struggle and ambition dissolve into a calming hush. The pharaohs sought immortality in stone and gold, but perhaps true peace lay simply in the quiet of an undisturbed night. As the historical narratives gently release their hold, feel yourself sinking deeper, a quiet stillness settling over you. There is no urgency here, no need for vigilance. Only the soft rhythm of your own breath and the comforting knowledge that the sun will rise again without the need for a pharaoh's divine intervention. Drift now into that peaceful space between waking and sleeping. Let the sounds of the world grow soft and distant. You have traversed millennia, witnessed the lives of gods and commoners, and now it is time for rest. May your dreams be gentle, unburdened by ancient duties or the weight of empire. Sweet dreams.